It's an enormous honour to welcome Gabe Newell to the stage. And as he's coming up, I'll start the introduction because I want to be able to hear from him for as much as possible. Look, I knew nothing about games, and then I was told I was a complete idiot by my 15-year-old son when we were living in LA. He still thinks I'm a complete idiot 7 years later. But the thing that he said is, I was always down on him about games. I thought, read a book, do something sophisticated. And he says, you don't understand, Dad, and you need to do it. And he says, let's go to Seattle and visit Valve because they have open days. And I had no idea what Valve was. And so Connor, my boy, took me up there. He was hoping beyond hope that Gabe would be in residence that day, but he wasn't. But we met some New Zealand creative directors who had gone to work for Gabe in Seattle from Weta. And I thought, that's a bit odd. What does a creative director do around Space Invaders? And then as we toured the plant, we realized actually it was cinematic. There were storytellers, there were composers, there were writers, there were voice actors. And what what I learned about was that games had actually changed completely. They were about immersive environments and stories. And so the scales fell off my eyes. And the other thing I saw was incredible management practices of really multi-skilled teams working together organically to create these worlds. It was a really intensely creative environment. And that was created by Gabe, and he also had the wisdom about 20 years ago to build a distribution platform for games, and it's the most popular distribution platform in the world. I think more than half of the games are distributed by Steam, and that Valve and Gabe owns. And then the other thing is, he's also at the leading edge of technology. We were looking in 2013 and 14 at Vive, the virtual reality. So Gabe, without doubt, is one of the, if not the most important person in the gaming industry in the world. I'm going on about this because people of my generation who haven't had the experience that I have may not understand how significant this person is and how lucky we are to have in New Zealand. So please give it up for Gabe. Is that all right? And are you a New Zealand resident?
I am a New Zealand resident.
Yeah! We got one through. So, since you've been here in March, tell us how you happened to arrive here in March last year.
So my parents, who are in their late 80s, had always wanted to come to New Zealand, so a group of us from around the world decided to meet them here. We were supposed to be here for 10 days, but then the situation with the pandemic in the United States really started to get out of control. And the last thing we wanted was for them to go back to Colorado, so we've been here ever since.
Fantastic. So but when you look at, when we talked, and I've done a little bit of reading, you haven't just been passive and sitting around and obviously doing a lot of Zoom calls back to the United States. You've immersed yourself in this country. And so there's three things, motorsport, America's Cup, and esports, which we'll get to. But tell us about motorsport and what your experience and what you've been doing in that field.
So I've been pretty interested in understanding New Zealand better, and we've tried a number of different things so I can just try stuff, see what it's like to get legal agreements done, see what promotion is like. One of the things we do in the States is we raise money for Seattle Children's Hospital through motorsports. Motorsports is kind of an inherently selfish thing, so we try to do something that is more about giving back. And we've replicated that here. The team's called Heart of Racing, and we're working with Starship to do the same kinds of things. And we've tried other things like working with Weta and Rocket Lab to launch a gnome into space. It's a reference to something that happens in one of our video games. And we raised a couple of $100,000 for Starship. And it's those sorts of things to just sort of understand what the business environment is like and how to actually get things done here.
And you also have been involved with America's Cup, with Team New Zealand.
Yep.
And Grant Dalton described you as a really good bloke. A really decent bloke is how he described you. And he said you were less a sponsor and more of a teammate. What was your, Pam and I have a bit of America's Cup experience, but how did you come at it and what was your experience there?
So I think the interesting thing to me as somebody in technology fields and as a businessman is just how, what Team New Zealand tells a businessman about New Zealand's capabilities, right? they're at the cutting edge of some really critical technologies. Like my view of America's Cup before being involved with Team New Zealand is it's a sleepy old sport for people who are nostalgic about the 1870s. And instead, when we go in and look at it, right, they're doing absolutely world-class work in modeling, in simulations, in artificial intelligence. That's exactly the same kinds of things you'd be seeing at Intel or Facebook or Google, right? That kind of work is being done all the time here in New Zealand, and it's a remarkable example of what's possible. What New Zealand is capable at a world-class level in the most technical of fields.
Yeah, so Peter Gluckman in the green room was talking about trying to transfer and translate that capability into an institute. Do you think that the sort of the talents and skills and capabilities you saw in Team New Zealand are leverageable?
Absolutely. So I sort of walked through a couple of test cases. So one of the things that has emerged is when we started working with people like Milton and Jeremy, who came out of WETA, games were really much, they had a feel that was sort of like movie making. There were narrative devices. And then at the other, one of the big developments has been around esports, which behaves much more like traditional sports in terms, you don't want the rules to change every time, right? Football, there's not football 2.0 and football 3.0. And so in order to have these kinds of events, it's super useful to put on events. So we put on We Heart Aotearoa to get a sense of the feasibility of that. So when we just do these tests to see what's possible, there really is nothing in all of these interesting sort of high-tech areas in both the gaming industry and related fields that isn't feasible to do here.
And we Heart Aotearoa, there was an extravaganza of all sorts of things. So that happened in December last year. How many people went to We Heart Aotearoa? No, it's a different generation. Yeah.
So we're putting people into drift cars, so that's skewed a bit younger.
So tell us a little bit about the way you engaged with those audiences and how they responded, and what you thought about. What did you learn about the culture of this place doing that?
So when you do these kinds of things, you learn. So one of the things that's interesting, the differences between sort of the West Coast of the United States, legal stuff takes longer. Other things. How you do communications, you just sort of have to adapt it. But none of that's dramatic, right? You just want to run the test case. Can we actually hold an event? Can we get people to show up? Is it a successful event? And there's, the message that I gave back to people in the United States is, that everything is here that you need, right, to take these opportunities. And there are a bunch of things that I think we're going to talk about that are now unique to New Zealand, right, in terms of why you would be interested in hosting either workforces events here in New Zealand that are less attractive to run anywhere else in the world.
Yeah, and you've also been, I think, connecting with the Gaming Association here as well.
Yep.
And so how's that relationship? What's your perspective on that? I mean, in terms of its future and what its potential is?
Yeah, so one of the things, it's been great to get to know developers here and see the success, like Ninja Kiwi just went through an acquisition, which is a great, result for them. And like one of the things that came out of that is that there's a lot of passion and sort of entrepreneurial spirit here in New Zealand around gaming. It would be really helpful to make it easier for them to be able to bring in sort of more senior talent to help jumpstart stuff. It helps when you're trying to build a AAA title to have access to some of the people either in Europe or in the United States or in Japan who've been through that a couple of times. So that's one of the major things. And also making it easier for capital around the country to fund these projects. It seems like there are some difficulties. I'm not trying to do fundraising, so I don't have any hands-on experience with that, but it seems like there are a lot of challenges. When I look at the businesses that are here, it seems like they would be super attractive to capital around the world, and there seem to be some impediments to making that happen.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. I think there are barriers. It's cultural barriers as opposed to actually people. What is the access problems? It may be that they're struggling with closed borders. Is it closed borders, or is it other things that you think it could be?
Like I said, some of these things I've done. Like I've run an event here. I'm absolutely confident that esports events of the highest caliber could could be successfully operated here, and there'd be great reasons to it. I haven't tried to raise money here, so this is all secondhand and anecdotal, that there are challenges to what look to me like highly successful video game businesses with a lot of prospects have trouble sort of sourcing capital more than they ought to. So, but I haven't tried to raise capital here, so I don't know the specifics.
Well, I think it's something that was an action. We need to come to the bottom of this one, and it's an Auckland Unlimited action for this year, because I think it's a really important one, particularly for the game industry. Moving on, we talked in the last panel about opportunities and what we need to do, but before we do that, your business is a global business. You're operating around the world, so perhaps you could describe, where your business is operating around the world and what COVID has done to it, and how you're shifting your strategy in response to what's happened in the last year.
Yeah. So we're a really large business. So if you look at kind of the amount of internet traffic that's generated by our video games and our platforms, it's larger than a lot of countries. Like the last time I checked, we were larger than the UK, right, in terms of how much. So people don't necessarily understand the scale of what you're doing with these kinds of businesses. And when you build those, there are two aspects to it. One is service provision, and the other is your workforce. On the service provision side, you're used to planning around natural disasters, because the last thing you can afford is that a hurricane someplace means that you're not able to serve your customers for a couple of weeks, or an earthquake, or a volcano, or some other natural disaster. So you try to distribute your footprint as much across the world as possible. That's just a standard part of the planning and strategic planning that you do. And I think that COVID has really opened my eyes and a bunch of other people's eyes to the risks to your workforce of not hedging those risks appropriately. So when you look at our productivity over the last year, we're not a capital-intensive business. The most important things are the productivity of our workforce, and it's knocked down by about 30%. So imagine if you're in a business and your ability to produce is reduced by, it's a huge supply shock. It varies depending upon which aspect of it, but overall it's about 30% down. And you look at other companies like the Googles and Microsofts of the world, they're going to be experiencing similar kinds of reductions in productivity. And New Zealand has created, through all of everybody's efforts, this enormously valuable place where you can go and have, meetings like this where you get a lot of work done. You can have face-to-face conversations where you're not getting that sort of 30% hit. And I think that that's going to be incredibly attractive to people, saying we need to be able to have offices set up in New Zealand because they have this proven track record. Anybody who thinks that COVID is not going to be impairing productivity for knowledge workers for the next several years is, I think, being really myopic about the real costs associated for pandemic responses. I think, it's hard for people in Auckland to really grasp how damaged things are, outside of here. But I'm talking to friends in Seattle and coworkers in Seattle all the time. And there are a lot of people that I talk to who literally don't go out of their house for months at a time. Obviously, vaccines are going to help, but then you've got the variants coming. You've got the Brazilian variant that's spreading up and down the West Coast. So this is not a problem that's going to go away. And realistically, we should anticipate, because of climate change, that this will be an ongoing challenge. Right now it's COVID-19. At some point, it's going to be MERS-2 or something along those lines. And if you're trying to plan where is a safe place to have a workforce, New Zealand has proven that it is, if not the best, certainly in the top 3 places in the world for hosting high-tech workers, where you're going to be able to distribute risk around this. This is something that has enormous appeal to us at Valve, but I'm sure it's going to be appealing to a wide variety of people, that this is a great place to have part of your labor force to offset any potentials down the road. And
so how do we capture that opportunity? I mean, you've had the privilege, that you've been lucky to be able to get out and immerse yourself, and I think when we were talking on the phone the other day, you were talking about pilots to actually assess how these things are operating. And so you were talking that all the big tech companies should be doing this in this place.
Yeah, and I think they should be doing it, and it's just really a question of how welcoming New Zealand and Auckland are going to be to those sort of pilot programs. I think that they would be great. I think that they should be embraced. I think it's a great opportunity for New Zealand to capitalize on all the hard work they've done. But I'm happy to help participate in spreading that message, right? I've certainly been a beneficiary of it, and I expect, that my colleagues at these other companies are going to be equally appreciative of the opportunity that's represented. So just work with them, help get these pilot programs going, and then they'll just build organically from there.
Yeah, and the other question is this about importing labor, or is it about cultivating labor locally? How do you approach that?
I think that having you're going to develop New Zealand skills here. You're going to want to move them to headquarters to continue to do their professional development. They'll be coming back. There are lots of skills and talents that are going to be useful that are not currently in New Zealand that'll help jumpstart it. So it's just becoming part of that global community of high-tech workers and being perceived as and recognized as a great place to develop these kinds of products and services.
So we've got a question from Jane Sweeney. Valve's employee handbook is iconic and ahead of its time, and she loves it. Thoughts, please, on how to create a truly engaging culture that attracts world-class talent?
There's just a bunch of basic things. Like the more talented people are, they have, it's a different kind of world. Like when you look at our productivity per employee, it's, tens of millions, not hundreds of thousands of dollars in revenue per employee. And so what you do with people like that, a lot of times is offering them flexibility, autonomy, and great colleagues to work with. The number one request I get nowadays is not for higher salary or more vacation time. It's getting into New Zealand realistically. So.
Yeah. Okay. So I think for you, what's your next steps in terms of your relationship with this country?
Oh, well, I'm here for the foreseeable future. I became a resident with that expectation, and certainly, our offices aren't open. Everybody's working remotely. I'm just working slightly more remotely than everybody else. So I certainly find this to be a great place to live. And, I just am waiting for situations to evolve that are going to, like all New Zealanders, are going to be looking for what sort of opportunities for travel that there are. But right now, I'm super happy to be here, and it's a great environment.
And in terms of the talent that you've seen here, how does it compare in terms of the talent pools that you have around the world?
New Zealand has all of the pieces to be a leader in just about any industry that New Zealand entrepreneurs decide to invest in. The technical skills, the educational system, the sort of attitude and make it happen kind of principles that are kind of critical to that are all here. So it's really just a chance of unleashing that spirit and seeing what it builds.
So Anonymous says, Valve just announced the International is heading to Sweden this year. What is the feasibility of bringing the International to Auckland in the short term?
I was trying, that was an internal debate. I was a big fan of having it in New Zealand, but there were a bunch of sunk costs associated with going to Sweden. So, but I've done all the legwork to know that we can have those events here.
Fantastic. Well, look, it's wonderful to have had you here on the stage today, and it's exciting to have you as a New Zealander. So please, everybody, thank Gabe Newell for giving us his time. Thank you.